Welcome back, friends. The third text in this course on New Literatures in English comes from Trinidad, a Caribbean island nation and a former British colony. The Caribbean is a chain of islands bordering the Caribbean Sea on the east, separating it from the Atlantic Ocean. Starting from around Cuba, which is close to the U.S. province of Florida and is the largest of the islands, to Guyana and Suriname, which are parts of the Latin American continent, the Caribbean covers a distance of more than 2,500 miles, forming a girdle-like curve. Also known as the West Indies and the Antilles, these islands have their pre-colonial indigenous histories followed by the histories of their colonization and decolonization. As Philip W. Saker puts it, there can be no complete understanding of a region as vast, complex, and vibrant as the Caribbean. Therefore, as Philip Saker suggests and does, a good way to a good understanding of the Caribbean is a compendium of several perspectives on the history and the cultures of the region. In some ways, the Caribbean has suffered an academic marginalization owing to the fact that the scholars of history and culture have generally looked on the region as homogeneous and subsumed under the history and culture of Latin America. The situation leads one to some inaccurate understanding of the region, which gets further inaccurate when scholars apply their understanding of Africa to the case of the Caribbean because of the fact that a substantial part of the population of the islands comprises of the people of African ancestry. One can understand, though, that the situation was occasioned by the fact of the early near decimation of the Amerindian population by Europeans and the subsequent repopulation of the islands by African slaves, Asian indentured servants, and other immigrants. Talking of the Caribbean means talking of a mind-boggling variety, because here is a collection of islands that was colonized by at least 5 European colonial empires and is now peopled by the descendants of the immigrants from Asia, Africa, and Europe, who have unknowingly incorporated the remnants of Amerindian life in their cultures. A very literary description of this Caribbean variety is here in this piece from the Nobel lecture of Derek Walcott. All of the Antilles, every island, is an effort of memory, every mind, every racial biography, culminating in amnesia and fog, pieces of sunlight through the fog, and sudden rainbows, as in Sierra. That is the effort, the labor of the Antillean imagination, rebuilding its gods from bamboo frames, phrase by phrase. As history records it, the European discovery of the Caribbean islands happened on October 1492, when Christopher Columbus landed on either the island of Samana Cay or Watlings Island, having traveled 2,400 nautical miles from Canary Islands near Africa. On his first voyage in 1492, Columbus found out San Salvador, the Bahamas, Cuba, and Hispaniola. He reached Trinidad in 1498 during his third voyage from 1498 to 1500 CE, in a way starting the colonial chapter in the history of the region. The first Trinidadians were the descendants of the same Amerindians who had first moved south from the North Polar regions into Alaska around 30,000 years ago, and over generations continued moving south into Americas. Going by the historical accounts, some Amerindians from Venezuela crossed the sea and began to live in Trinidad about 7,000 years ago. From the first arrival of Columbus in 1498, it took the Spaniards nearly 100 years to subdue the native Amerindians of Trinidad enough to set up a permanent settlement. It was only in 1592 that the town of San Jose de Oruna was founded by the Spanish soldier Antonio de Berrio. For more than 100 years thereafter, the Spanish rulers expanded their areas of influence and brought in a lot of demographic change by the conversions of the natives. This was the period when the Spanish crown ruled Trinidad through encomiendas and encouraged missionaries to convert the local population and gather the converted people in the mission villages. By reference to Linda A. Newson's book, Aboriginal and Spanish Colonial Trinidad, A Study in Culture Contact, online sources point out that there were at least 9 missions employed in these conversions during the Spanish colonial period in Trinidad. The sources also point out that Port of Spain, the capital of Trinidad today, probably began as one of those mission villages. The economics of Trinidad began changing with the arrival of the French in late 1790s, who brought slaves from Africa and started sugar, coffee and cotton plantations. However, 1790s was almost the time of the end of the Spanish and the French in Trinidad, and the island became a British colony in 1797 through the victory of the British naval fleet in the command of Ralph Abercrombie. From 1802, when the British possession of the island was confirmed by a treaty, Trinidad remained a British colony until 1962. The island of Tobago, around 200 kilometers away towards the north-east, became unified with Trinidad and became a part of the British colony of Trinidad and Tobago in 2 stages in 1889 and 1898, giving this new nation an area of 5,131 square kilometers. An embedded chapter in the cultural and economic history of the nation started on 30th May 1845, when the first batch of East Indian laborers was brought by the British to work in the sugar estates of Trinidad to replace the African slaves who chose to leave the estates after the Emancipation Act of 1833, till 1920, when the practice of indentured labor ended in Trinidad. The number of East Indians brought by the British had reached around 145,000 people, comprising of both men and women. One must remind oneself at this point that there were thousands of African slaves already brought to this island of Trinidad before the East Indians began to be brought in by the British. The population of the nation today has 2 major chunks of almost equal numerical strength: the people with African ancestry and the people with Indian ancestry. Interestingly but sadly, the Aborigines of the islands, the descendants of the Amerindians, are nowhere to be found. There only remains the traces of their life before the arrival of the colonizers. One must also bear in mind that the Amerindians, who could claim their identity as the Aborigines of the region, were also migrants arriving on the islands from Latin America. Migration, thus, is an important factor in the demographic and cultural history of the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. What goes into the making of the cultural expressions of the Caribbean in general, of which the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago is an integral part, is thus summed up by Alexandra Bronfman. It has developed political systems ranging from parliamentary democracies to lengthy dictatorships, leaning both right and left. Its heterogeneity cannot be overstated. Fragmentation has been one of the major metaphors used to describe the place. At the same time, as many have observed, shared histories of colonialism, dependence on export-based economies, and cultural invention resonate across the islands. The tension between consistency and fragmentation makes understanding the Caribbean a fascinating challenge. The text from the Caribbean that we will later take up for study is Gorillas a novel published in 1975. The happenings in the novel take place on an unidentified island, yet authored by V.S. Naipaul as it is, and as the island, that is the locale of the story, has a domineering presence of the British, it is easy to conclude that the island in Naipaul's mind is Trinidad. The novel has some oblique but meaningful connections with the post-colonial history of Trinidad. Dear friends, in these two parts of this talk, we have made the start of a kind of journey around the world. We had panoramic glimpses of the histories and cultures of Canada and Trinidad in the Caribbean, the locations from where we have picked up 3 texts for study in later units. Till we meet again for the 2 parts of our next lesson, take care.